Welcome to Common Sense. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Ed, and
And I'm John.
hey, John.
How are you, Ed?
I'm good, thanks. It's getting cold up here in Boston. How's it there in Houston?
It's relatively cold, but that doesn't mean anything.
Well, we don't have snow yet, but it's coming soon, I think.
Well, we're expecting to be playing golf in the next few months down here,
Oh,
so
yeah, you're rubbing it in.
your heart out.
All right.
So, welcome again to Common Sense. In this series, we're taking a common sense approach to discussing some of the thorniest issues in sales and marketing today. And today we're going to be talking about how to build an effective sales and marketing team. Both of us have experience in this area. Ed has had a lot more experience working with industrial companies and helping them to build out sales and marketing teams and capabilities. So why don't we start there with kind of the big question, and that seems to usually be, how do you build the team? And do you build it yourself, or do you hire an agency? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that is ultimately the big question. And what I've seen in the industrial space, and of course, you've got a lot of experience from the agency perspective. And so that's an important complement to this. Because there's sometimes, we kind of treat them as opposite perspectives, but maybe they're two sides of the same coin. So let's kind of work through it collaboratively and see where we get to. But generally, what I find is that industrial companies that I work with, they've got a big field sales force. I mean, that's the way they've developed business, and they tend to have essentially an outsourced sales force in the form of sales channel, and they've got a relatively small marketing function. And so part of the problem that companies are having now, as marketing becomes much more important with this 70% of the buying journey being done before they talk to a sales rep and all the stats that we all know so well, that means that a lot of the sales process is happening virtually. And so if it's happening virtually, we need more marketing. And I believe we talked a couple of weeks ago about how that, we could take this whole revenue growth function and mash it up into a continuum of skills rather than these silos. But the point is that most of these companies need a bigger marketing department. And so in that case, do they outsource the marketing or do they insource the marketing? And I think my sense, and I'd love your perspective on this, a couple of years ago, companies were saying, well, this is really different than what we do. This is fancy digital stuff. We're going to outsource this to agencies that really know it, that have social media and can, do graphic design. And now more and more they're saying, wait a minute, this is kind of core to our growth function, and manufacturers love building stuff themselves anyway. They hate the idea of outsourcing it. So I think I'm kind of seeing this shift where as the marketing function becomes more important, that more companies are trying to figure out how to bring it in-house. Does that match what you've seen?
I think so. I think it's especially true in manufacturing because you have to know the product in order to sell it. And if you bring in an agency from the outside, it's just going to be some sort of learning curve unless they've worked in your specific industry for a long time. You might not get the insider knowledge that would really help you position the products and generate effective campaigns. So I think it can be both, but it's really worth thinking about what is closely held, what needs to stay in-house and what could be outsourced, what kinds of functions. So I think it could be a blend of both.
And that function and skill set question is an important piece of it. So you said kind of what's inside knowledge, and the product, the industry, the use cases, the value proposition, those tend to be unique in the manufacturing space and can be hard for an outsourced marketing firm to pick up on. The other piece of it, though, is some of the technical skills. So, analytics. A good data analytics person can look at the data and tease out information without necessarily having specific industry experience. Or great video skills are obviously horizontal across industries. So as companies begin to wrestle with this question, do we insource, do we outsource, do we build the muscle ourselves? There's a big philosophical piece of it, but then there's specific skill sets. And so a blended solution often works really well.
Right. I think that's a really good point about the analytics side, the data side of things too, because it's one thing to collect a bunch of leads and then show that you've grown lead generation by X% per month. it's quite another to qualify those leads and turn them into real sales qualified leads, and then understand what that data really means in the context of your industry and your competitors. And it's hard for an outsider to really understand those nuances, I think. So,
and back to our CRM conversation a couple of weeks ago, you talked about the importance of data in that case. And so as you start to be able to look at sales cycle and how deals from different sources close at different rates and all those kinds of really fascinating nuances that aren't just informational, but can actually help provide substance to the way you adjust the program. It can be a really important piece. Of course, you very much come from that data perspective, so you understand that better than many people.
Yeah, I think, if you think about that, then really the heaviest weight inside the company needs to be on strategy and understanding the customers, and then also on the back end of it, understanding what the results mean and what the next thing is. How should we adjust? What are we failing in, or what are we succeeding in? And in between, you might have some tactical things that maybe a freelancer or an agency might be able to handle effectively.
You just actually touched on an interesting point. I would come at it a little bit differently than you did, though. You said that the critical foundation for all of it is strategy and knowing the customers. And one of the interesting things that I see with most manufacturers is they know their product or their service really, really well. They don't know the customers nearly as well as they think they do. And so interestingly, even though your point is that that's a core competence that comes from the company, I would argue that that may be a really valuable place for an outsource consultant with a fresh perspective, clear eyes, open ears to come in and maybe even work on a persona process and really understand buyers perhaps better than the company does themselves.
Yeah, I agree. I think you can't do it in a vacuum, though. So it really will take a team effort at that high level strategy end of things, because
right.
Your sales team is going to be much more familiar with the customers if they don't really understand them. So the consultant can really help to connect the dots and help them understand what's really going on.
Right.
Because they've been living in that place for so long, they may not even recognize it.
Right, for sure.
So, well, that's a good place to start then. So at a very high level, let's say you're the CEO and some of the other decision makers, what should you start thinking about in terms of budget to start building out this capability, this modern digital team that's talking to each other and coming up with new ideas and even bringing in, connected messaging and content across the whole organization? So what does that really take?
Well, I think the first step is a baby aspirin, because I think that what happens in most cases, people have a stroke when you really sit down to talk about what this means. Because most of the kinds of companies that I work with, in the SaaS world, you've got development costs, you've got marketing costs. I mean, that marketing is a huge part of the budget. In the industrial world, the manufacturing world, or other parts, more traditional parts of the B2B world, in many cases, the marketing budget is a trade show budget with, maybe a little bit of, there's a part-time person that coordinates and writes quotes, and maybe there's a little bit of advertising in journals, but it's a tiny piece of the company's overall operation. And that was because they had this huge field sales force that did all of it, generated the leads, closed the deals, took care of the customers, managed the sales channel, all that kind of stuff. And so as that shifts and as they need a marketing department to do things they've never done, well, guess what? That means that the marketing department needs more resources than it ever had. And really those appropriately come from the sales department, because the sales department has a smaller closing role and the marketing department has a larger generation role. So as just a WAG, a rule of thumb, 5% of revenue maybe, just to kind of get people in the ballpark of the kind of thing they ought to be thinking about. And that compares to, in many cases, like 0.5%. So it's a big, it's startling for people when you talk about that.
For sure. I mean, that's probably 5-10 times more than they've spent in the past on marketing.
Right.
And that's really, like you said, because they had a smaller footprint. They just had maybe a PR group, and maybe an investor relations group, and they published some annual reports and did some other nice brochures and things like that. But that was about it. So
Right.
it didn't really take a big effort or a lot of budget.
The good news is the print budget is going to be a lot smaller than it's traditionally been. So there's a place to save some money. And plus they don't have the closet down the hallway stacked up to the ceiling with stuff that's outdated and they're never going to use again.
So what are they going to be spending this budget on? What would be the sort of the priorities for, getting started, getting off the ground with this new team?
So we can answer that question and tackle it two different ways. There's skill sets that are needed, there's functions that are needed, but there's also the question of what do you need the marketing department to do? And so I always come back to start with corporate strategy, figure out where you need the corporation to go, what your revenue goals are, where you need that growth to come from. Overlay that on top of a revenue growth strategy. How are you going to do this? How does sales channel fit in? What sectors are we targeting? How are we going to increase each sale incrementally, et cetera? And then figure out what you need this marketing function to do. At a high level, if lead generation used to be primarily the function of salespeople, out cold calling and working in the field and working with sales channel, and all marketing did was manage trade shows and do bingo cards and things like that, what we need to do is change the marketing function to create demand generation, to do lead generation, to do branding, to do BR, to do inside sales, because now, again, if buyers are 70% of the way through the buying journey before they want to talk to a sales rep, they still need some interaction with somebody that's thoughtful and can kind of lead them at the appropriate point, hand them over in a way that's comfortable. You need technology to support this, and you need some sort of after the inside sales function, you need some sales enablement in order to help give the sales channel and the field salespeople the insights that you've collected and the right tools in order to capitalize on those. So we're talking about a much bigger scope of responsibility for the marketing function. And so then what we can do is kind of work back from what they need to get done and say, all right, that means we need some PR functionality. We need some communications. We need email. We need product marketing. We need digital marketing. We need SEO. We need analytics. We need video. We need social media. And you can start to figure out what the discrete functions are in there. And then depending on the size of a group, you start to think about how you're going to allocate those responsibilities across individual people or share responsibilities or outsource or whatever.
So the pushback I always get is that our company, our customers aren't on social media. They don't read blogs. They're not, visiting the website. So none of that stuff has ever worked for us. How do we get past that obstacle or that barrier to getting this thing rolling?
I think what's always funny about that, the same person that tells me that used their desktop computer 30 minutes before we sat down for the meeting to research something themselves. I mean, there's a disconnect between how we think about the way we sell and the way we buy. And that's really a manifestation, going back to the point of understanding buyers. It's kind of silly to say that buyers in your industry don't do it when statistically 93% of B2B purchases originate with an online search. And personally, anecdotally, we know that's how we begin something. We can have a conversation about that all day long. The simplest way to overcome it is to just kind of look in the mirror and say, how do you buy? Well, that's the way you buy. And guess what? You're no different than your customers.
Absolutely. So what we need is a team of people with experience and people with skills, functional skills. And what else do we need? I know we'll cover those in a little more depth, but is there anything else that at sort of the cultural level that we need in order to be more successful in sales?
Cultural level, there absolutely has to be high-level management buy-in to the fact that it's not just field salespeople out operating autonomously, coming back into the office to submit expense reports that are driving the business. It has to be a collaborative effort across the revenue growth function. And then there's got to be some cultural work to overcome the mindsets like you described of people, our buyers don't use the internet, but even the kinds of things that companies think they're capable of. So companies that have bent and welded steel for years, manufacturing something, often recoil at the idea if you say, well, geez, you guys, you're going to have to become publishers. You're going to have to start writing. And so culturally, you need to get comfortable with the idea that you're going to have writers. You're going to have journalists. You're going to have people that have great interviewing skills and can do research and can go to industry events and get up on the podium and speak to large crowds of people in an engaging way. You got to have people that can think tactically and strategically and can bounce back and forth between the two. And I don't know, are you familiar with Carol Dweck's growth versus fixed mindset? That's
Sure.
That's a phenomenal tool, and I think could be a great screening tool for companies that are hiring. When you talk about it culturally, I think growth mindset is critically important for this, because if you're the kind of person that says, oh, well, that's never worked in this company before, it's never worked in this industry, well, you're right, it's not going to going forward, except it is for other people. Empathy for buyers is a huge component of that kind of cultural switch that has to happen, going back to your point about really understanding the buyer, not what we want to talk about our product and service, but why people actually buy it. And it's not for the features, it's not for the horsepower, it's not for the HMI or for the seal bearings or any of that kind of stuff. It's because of how it gets them out of there at 5 o'clock in the evening, or boosts the profit, or reduces turnover, or whatever the case may be. Curiosity. I think the marketing teams that I see do this stuff really well are curious. They read their trade journals, they read Wired magazine, they read the Wall Street Journal, they read all these different sources. They read a lot, books and industry journals and blogs. And that's actually an interesting point. Reading blogs becomes an important discriminator, because we're telling people they got to write blogs. And if somebody says, oh yeah, I buy into that idea, and they never read any, well, there's a cultural disconnect there, and you can begin to recognize that.
Plus, they don't know how to write a blog.
Well, exactly. Yeah, good point. And I'd say another huge cultural point is, I'm kind of mentioned this last on the list, but it could well be first on the list. Got to be willing to fail. I mean, you're gonna write a lot of stuff. You're gonna produce a lot of stuff, and some of it's gonna be great, and it's gonna fail. Some of it you're gonna think was pretty mediocre, and it's gonna work really, really well. And so you got to just be comfortable with the idea that you are gonna stub your toe frequently doing this.
So you're describing a person that's kind of different from what most companies have now in their sales and marketing departments. And I know you and I have both been classically trained in sales, and this is quite different set of skills from what we were trained to do back in the day, and probably most people that are in sales even today. Can you describe some of those differences? And you've just touched on quite a few of them, but what's this new kind of sales and marketing pro look like?
So I think your question has embedded in it a kind of a premise that's absolutely correct. I mean, you're now saying this sales and marketing, or marketing and sales pro, and that's a critical distinction. It used to be you had the marketing person that went to school and got a marketing degree and did this stuff, organized the trade shows and got the bingo decks and out in the mail, and then kind of threw the leads over the wall to sales. And there was this bifurcation, and now there really isn't. We talked before about encouraging companies to eliminate the silos and kind of organizationally recognize that there isn't. Even if you still have the silos, there needs to be a blend of capabilities between the two, because salespeople, in their personal use of social media and their use of content that the company has and their creation of content, their ability to kind of go out and in some cases create their own content, speaking at events, etc. They have to be marketers, and at the same time, the marketing department has to be inside salespeople. So I'd say that if I was going to pick a place that I think is most different than it used to be, it's the whole question of qualification. Because it used to be that people would say, we're going to qualify leads, and that meant, a BANT. Let's use the BANT model. They had to have the budget, they had to have the clear need, they had to have the timeline, they had to have the authority to buy it. Well, if you've got, in complex sales, team buying, And if you've got budgets that are very fluid based on what's happening and reallocated priorities within a company on a regular basis, sure, there's somebody that can pull money from one budget and put it into another. And so in a sense, they're the ones with authority. But in most cases, there are consensus decisions. People, the presidents and GMs are loath, in my experience, to have a team of HR, engineering, maintenance, procurement, and finance get together, evaluate products, make a recommendation, and it's very, very rare that you see somebody say, screw that, we're doing it my way. It doesn't happen. It's consensus decision. So back to my point, this whole thing about a very classic qualification model, I think needs to be revisited with this non-linear buying journey that people go through, and team buying and early research into things before they're ready to buy, unlike the way they used to. So I'd say qualifications is the biggest thing. Does that match what you've seen, or am I a little bit nuts about that?
No, I think that's absolutely correct. I think you have to have a good eye for a good fit. You have to be a subject area expert yourself, or you're not going anywhere. You're not providing that early value in the relationship, and they're not going to trust you to take it to the finish line. So those two things, really understanding what qualifies a buyer and how to get that information from them through conversation, and then just being somebody that they want to go to in order to get solutions to their problems.
Right.
Those are the big things now.
And I guess the other piece is, it's not all by conversation now. I mean, a large part of that information that you collect is by inference and observation of digital body language. Mm-hmm. So I guess the other piece to it is that today's marketing sales professional has to be technically comfortable with technology, let me say, because if they're going to jump into a CRM, like we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and look at a timeline of activity and read between the lines of the buyer behaviors, that's got to be somebody that can kind of think that way and is comfortable with that perspective.
So do you think that, everybody's going to say, well, can I do that with my existing team, with my existing people? Can I get them there? Can I train them up? Can I identify those people within the group that are fit for this new task or this new role? Or do they need to think outside the box a little bit more?
So, I mean, that's a tough question for every organization. I mean, that's the crux of change management, right? And what we're talking about is change management. You're changing your business process for revenue growth, and that entails resource reallocation and organizational changes. So it really becomes a change management challenge. That being said, in my experience, the growth mindset discriminator is a great one to start with. If your sales or marketing people have been coming to you with ideas, well, let's try this, let's try that, and even if it's kind of the shiny object obsession, at least they're interested in new ways and trying different things, as long as it's just not to excuse poor performance. Saying, well, you didn't buy that for me, so that's why I couldn't get my job done. But if they're looking for new ways to do it, I'd say there's a great chance that they're the right people. On the other hand, if they say, I've got a flip phone only because I can't get to a payphone anymore because there's no more payphones, and I've got literally a Rolodex, and I've got literally a paper calendar, and I use sticky notes, and that's the way I manage my projects, with a set of file folders and in a plastic file box in the backseat of my car. This may be unfair of me to say, but the person they're not going to make it. And that's independent of age. That's independent of educational background. That's independent of industry. That's mindset. I mean, I've seen 27-year-old salespeople that have those same kind of restrictive mindsets, and I've seen 65-year-old salespeople that are absolutely engaged and embracing, this is fabulous. I wish I'd had this information about buyers, 30 years ago when I started selling, that kind of thing. So I think you're going to have to replace some of them. You're going to have to balance that against maintaining revenue as you go through the process. I think you absolutely start to hire with your new ideal profile in mind. And that changes the way you advertise for salespeople. It changes the way you hire salespeople. And it could be that you're, in fact, hiring fewer salespeople. Maybe what you're doing, maybe your next hire is an inside salesperson. Maybe the next hire after that is a journalist that would love to learn a little bit of sales, or a journalist student that's been selling cell phones or copying machines because they haven't been able to find a journalism job. What a dream candidate. You get somebody that can write, that can interview, and that's actually done some really hard sales. I mean, that's the kind of blended skill set that I think you start to want to add in as you're adding new employees.
Well, let's talk a little more specifically about those criteria that you'd either use in an interview, external interview, or an internal interview. So what kind of skills and experience would you be looking for?
So there's those soft skills that we talked about: ability to write, ability to empathize with clients, growth mindset, stuff like that. And then there's kind of, in my experience, maybe categories of professional skills that would include familiarity with business finance. I mean, in the complex sales world, is some of the really silly ROIs that you see bandied around are, they're embarrassing, honestly. And so a little bit of familiarity with business finance, an understanding of how budgets are set and how capital is allocated, that sort of thing. Sales, I mean, marketing people ought to understand sales and ideally have sales experience, and vice versa. Salespeople ought to be comfortable in marketing, even if it's marketing themselves. If you have a salesperson come to you and they've got a really crummy LinkedIn profile, and they've got no social media activity, and they don't write anything, and you can barely find them online, well, guess what? They're not a great salesperson going forward for the future. Management perspective. I mean, part of change management, you want people to change. It's great if they can empathize with you as a manager, just as you ask them to empathize with their buyers. And being able to sell effectively means understanding management on the other side of the transaction, and the fact that they may love the idea, they may want to do it, but they got 17 other things that they have to do before as a priority. People that have sold at trade shows, familiarity with PR, at least how PR could fit in, what it could do. Channel, I think sales channel background and experience is a great skill set to make sure you have on your team. International, increasingly, if companies do digital marketing really well, they get international leads coming to them, and they sell some international deals. So some familiarity and comfort with talking through international transactions and payments and currencies and logistics, and just being able to get the deal set up, that's a great skill set to have. Events are becoming I think a bigger piece of marketing for companies. So some familiarity with event management, doesn't have to be, a professional event manager certified, but at least kind of knowing what goes into it and how you might use it, how it could complement marketing. Presentations, not traditional pitch decks, where we flip through one dreadful slide after another, but the ability to stand up and speak to a group and ask questions and solicit. Right? Yeah, exactly. Right. Project management. I mean, these are often long, complex projects and contract negotiation, and not just curling up in a ball and running back to the office and saying, "Oh, they say the price is too high. What am I going to do?" But being able to have a substantive negotiation. And I guess kind of going back to one of the earlier points, I'd say you need individuals to be a face of the business too. It's not just a company brand now. People are doing business with people, and so you need to seek out influencers that have following and can attract following and can be compelling online. And it's great to have a collection of those people. You got to manage the egos. You got to manage the terms of engagement, make sure people are appropriate in what they're doing. But having those prominent individual marketers or personal promoters as part of your team will absolutely help the company as well.
So in reality, probably no one fits all of these criteria, right? Even us.
Yeah.
But how do you effectively kind of rank order people when they come in? I mean, let's say somebody comes in and is an absolute rock star salesperson, at least, track record wise, but they don't really have any marketing experience. They don't really know what this new digital stuff is about. How do you handle kind of putting those people into a bucket of qualified candidates or not?
Well, so I'd say this goes back to always that same foundation: company strategy, revenue growth strategy, marketing or revenue growth framework. And to where you started this conversation, what are you outsourcing? What are you insourcing? And just because you've traditionally had a field sales force of 30 people and a marketing department of 2 doesn't mean when a salesperson leaves or gets fired that that's the position you ought to replace. So So I'd say the first thing is be very clear about where you need to be putting bodies. And as you're clear about where you need to put bodies, then you'll be clear about the skill sets that you need for those roles. Now, to your point about when you have a candidate that's really appealing in many ways, but you're not sure it fits the profile, I'm a big believer in developing the profile for that reason, because it's easy to fall in love with somebody, and if they're not going to do what you need them to do, then ultimately it often ends up being a bad hire. And if they're just kind of one of these traditional salespeople that did a great job meeting quota in a certain industry in the past based on a different sort of a model, and they don't embrace some of the kinds of things, and they can't manifest, not just say, oh yeah, I agree, but show you that they've, written something, they've developed their online profile, that they've made videos of themselves discussing things. They don't have to demonstrate professional proficiency, but just an open-mindedness and a kind of an embrace of where you're going with your effort. I would say if they can't do that, then it's probably not going to be a good fit. You're going to be trying to take a traditional employee and fit them into this model that you're working so hard to get everyone else to change, and now you're going to kind of create this drag for yourself.
So being really clear about your goals and expectations, and then just being disciplined about sticking to the program, sounds like really the key to this whole building of the internal team, at least.
Well, or even figuring out where you want to plug in externally.
Yeah.
So if you're disciplined about what you need, and you say, we've got this person, they're in sales, but they don't enjoy it, but they're really good at doing this other stuff. We're going to kind of slide and make them inside sales and do a little bit of marketing. And that means we've covered a lot of what we need, but we don't have in-house video skills that are very good. And so then you just go and you bring in the technical skill of the video from outside, and you outsource tactically to fill the gaps where you've got good people, but you've got a skill set that's missing.
Sounds good. Well, let's turn our attention to some of the more modern digital techniques and tactics and skills that you need. I know there's quite a few of them that most of us that have kids are already experts at. But if we're hiring people who are experienced in sales and management and some of these other things that often take years to really develop, can we really expect them to be experts at Facebook advertising and things like that? Or is that a separate person, a different role?
Well, let me ask you a question. How do you know somebody's an expert? Whether you expect them to be or not, how do you know if they are? I mean, if they tell you they're an expert in Facebook ads and I'm not, how can I gauge whether they are? And I have this conversation with people a lot, particularly business owners, about accountants and lawyers. My accountant's the best in the world. Well, how do you know? I mean, he talks about things and he knows things you don't know, so you assume that makes him an expert, but maybe he's missing 75% of what he ought to be telling you about. So how do you gauge, particularly when stuff is changing so fast? If Facebook ads 6 months ago is different than Facebook ads today and different than Facebook ads in 6 months from now, how do you know who is an expert? I mean, that's a tough question to answer.
It is, and I think there's two answers, really. The old way that we always did was having a resume that had a lot of things on it that you could point to and say, I accomplished this and this and this and this. And then they could always call your ex-employer and see if it's true. That's not so effective anymore because everybody embellishes their resumes and everybody has things in there that probably aren't the case. But today's younger people understand how to build their own personas online. They know how to market themselves. They have profiles on all the different social media sites. And if they're smart, they're business oriented, not just strictly fun. So they are learning how to sell themselves already. And most of them have videos. Most of them have blogs and things that they've written or artwork or whatever they can point to that shows off their skills. So, I think most younger people today really kind of get that, and they've been working on it for years. And so it's a little easier for them. They may not know how to write a resume.
Sure.
But they can come in and tell a story, and they can sure write something, and they can stand in front of you and perform, So
So I think the hardest thing facing any business person is finding somebody that's really as good as you think they are, because there's a huge opportunity cost if they're not. And that's true whether you're talking about who you're going to outsource to, whether it's your accountant or your attorney or your marketing agency or your lead gen, remote telemarketing service that you're using, or whatever the case may be. Just because somebody gets some results doesn't mean they're getting the results they could. And there's no good answer to that except to just be always reading and always trying to understand what's best practice, what's industry standard, what are benchmarks that we can be looking at. I think that's the only defense you have against that.
sure.
But in terms of the technical skills, you're right. I mean, there's more than any person, or in most cases, any company is going to have. And in some cases, maybe they don't need to have them. Maybe having video early in the process is a lower priority, although video is getting more and more important, but maybe that's one that you can skip. But, just kind of running down a list: social media, email marketing, analytics. I mean, analytics. We talked about it earlier, the value of data. Technology, the tech stack. I mean, they can bring in the MarTech Whisperer, but it'd be great for them to know, if they don't know, that call tracking is something they ought to be thinking about to supplement the inbound marketing, to make sure that web leads are recognized as web leads rather than as phone leads coming out of Yellow Pages. Then that's a gap. Design, graphic design. I mean, that's kind of been what people thought of as marketing in the past. Now it's in many cases, a Fiverr sort of a task, not for brand identity, but for simple tasks. Video, basic HTML. I would say augmented reality and virtual reality are absolutely critical technical skills to begin to think about. Now, that could well be one of those that you outsource, and maybe it's not part of your first 3 to 5 important skills, but in 3 years, it's going to absolutely be an important part of what you're doing.
For sure.
SEO and SEM, and not just kind of, we're going to put a couple keywords in something, but really understanding the very rich and nuanced fabric of, the way Moz talks about it, with all the different elements of it. Account-based marketing. I mean, a lot of people toss the term around, but who's actually doing it? Do you have the skill set? Paid ads, and not just Google AdWords, under SEM, but LinkedIn ads and Facebook ads. Facebook ads, I would even probably put as a separate category, because it's becoming such an incredibly important and complex and really intricate process. Like, how do you use Messenger to actually get more engagement so that your posts end up boosted because of what you did with Messenger? It's fascinating. It's very complex. Presentation building. How do you really tell a story? Storytelling. Everyone talks about the importance of storytelling. Do you have people that know how to build a presentation? Media training. I mean, if you're using PR and influencer strategies, and you're checking Haro and you want your CEO out telling stories, well, you need some media training so that he's doing that the right way, and that your internal PR people are. Competitive analysis. It's easy to say, oh, well, we keep track of keyword ranking, but who's keeping track of kind of from a product management perspective, what's in their pipeline, and what can you deduce from things they're sharing, and a lot of good competitive intelligence. CRM, we spent an hour talking about that last week. It's huge. I mean, CRM needs to drive sales process, needs to give the front end of the business the efficiency the back end has through lean and everything else. Certainly common tools, Google Analytics, Google Search Console, those kinds of things, people at least need to be conversant with them. Influencer marketing, I think, is increasingly important, although some people say it's decreasing. I think maybe it's a matter of semantics. The point is, upcoming generations of buyers use the opinions of other people as a very important indicator in their decisions. And so call it, referral marketing, influencer marketing, whatever. But I mean, those are some examples. I'm sure you can come up with another 15 or 20 off the top of your head.
There's a lot to try to understand and try to at least have some familiarity with. So would you say that the team lead at least needs to be familiar with all of these things in order to make decisions, in order to understand what either the internal team is promoting, or maybe an outsourced agency or something? You got to know what these things are, or you can't really evaluate them, and you can't really understand what they mean when the results come in.
And again, a place where growth mindset is so critical, because if the team lead has a fixed mindset or is worried about pissing on fire hydrants and says, oh, no, Facebook advertising, that's not for companies like ours. I know all about it and we're not going to do that. Maybe that's the right answer, but maybe it's not the right answer. And so that team lead, you're right, needs to be familiar with these things, needs to be a voracious reader, needs to follow a lot of blogs, needs to really amass a broad breadth of resources that he or she continuously reads, and have an open mind and growth mindset.
Yeah, I think, when we were hiring people for our agency, we always looked for passion. That was one of the top things we really wanted to see. So you have to it's that mindset, but it's also really enjoying it and really diving in and trying new things, and not, like you said earlier, not being afraid to fail.
Right.
And being accountable. And then infecting the rest of the team with that same passion, because, they won't necessarily do it on their own.
Right.
So, well, let's talk now about kind of the, what's first and what's next. How do we really get started with this? If you're thinking about, what to do next year, next quarter.
So, of course, it depends on where you're starting and where you want to go to. But kind of, if we're starting from the typical 2-person marketing department and 20-person field sales department, then I'd say you got to start with the management buy-in. You got to start with the idea you need some MarTech, that you need content online, that you need a variety of content. And so I'd say just kind of lead generation and content creation and strategy would be the places to start. So that means, writers, basically, a little bit of technical skill, some simple email marketing, some simple analytics, but a strong focus on the ability to write and create content is probably the biggest place to start.
That's funny, because most business owners and executives that come to us or came to us when I was working at Kuno, the first thing out of their mouths was, we need to redesign our website. And, it wasn't about any of those other things. Why do you think that mindset is so prevalent, and what should we say to them to get them on the right path?
Well, so number one, I'd say they're probably absolutely right. I mean, it may not be the first priority, but I'm sure that they need to redesign their website. But I'd also say that my guess is their vision of what they want to redesign to is probably not going to support the other things they want to accomplish. And so if you just begin to build the muscle, you get the idea of creating content and attracting new, unknown people with that content, converting new leads with that content, build a lead management process, understand that these leads are not like a traditional, I'm ready to buy such and such, I'm getting 3 quotes, send me a quote, but very early in the process of evaluating their options, get that stuff figured out, kind of internalize that, take a few months, do a pilot project, take 3 or 4 months, get that going. And then with that insight, in the meantime, you can let heat maps run on your website. You can build some insights into what's actually going on and get people thinking about this whole idea of conversion, and then begin the conversation about how you redesign the website with a goal toward user experience, talking about what's important to people, not to the company, and how to maximize conversions.
And so one of the reasons that agencies win deals or retainers or whatever is the idea that they can jump into the fire and get it done quickly. So, a CEO may say, well, we've got these goals and we have these things and we think we need this and this and this, but I don't have the staff to do it. And I don't really want to build one over time. It may take me, a year or 2 to get to where I need to go. So here you go. I'll pay you a premium to go do all this stuff for me. What kind of decision is that? I mean, do you find that that's often a problem? It often backfires because then they have nothing left after the website's built or whatever it is.
Well, so I would say those are 2 different questions. An agency to build a website as a discrete project is different than an agency to develop a program. And I never spoke to anybody that took that step with Kuno and then said, gosh, we made a mistake. So I think that It's a question of finance. It's a question of how fast you want to run. It's a question of um, the philosophically where you come down on outsourcing this versus insourcing. I would say though that what's often misgauged is the amount of management time that's going to be involved even with a great agency, because you're going to have to review content. You're going to be involved in planning at least a framework of what's happening, maybe not checking every email or kind of being involved in that detail, but there's going to be a lot. You can't just, what's a good way to think of it? So, if you outsource your payroll to a payroll service, you go online, you submit the numbers once a week, and that's all you worry about.
Right.
If you outsource your revenue growth process, or at least the marketing piece of it, you may have worked on a model where you could really wash your hands of it, but I'm not familiar with it. And so I think that the decision is not necessarily as black and white as people kind of think it is.
Yeah, I always used to think of it as, they want a touchdown, so they want to throw a Hail Mary, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, you get another quarterback.
Right.
It's not.
There is a lot of churn, I think.
Doing business. What's that?
There's a lot of churn in agencies. I mean, it's a problem for sure.
Yeah, and it's because on both sides the expectations are unrealistic. So right. It's really incumbent on the agency to help the buyer understand what the relationship is really going to be like. And like you said, it has to be a two-way street. And there has to be even really some passion on the company side.
And even sometimes a discussion about what happens if we're really successful.
Yeah.
I mean, if you create a bunch of leads for them and their salespeople won't or can't or don't follow up on them, then the investment was tremendously successful, but a complete failure. And so you got to kind of think through a couple steps too.
And that also fits your internal team. You really need to negotiate with them on a regular basis and make sure that everybody's accountable, everybody understands what the goals are, that there's a way of monitoring it for everyone to see how things are going.
Right.
And you have regular stand-ups or regular meetings and review the things that are not working.
And accountabilities. I mean, when you keep coming back, somebody who's supposed to have done something and it's been 3 weeks and it's not done yet, I mean, there's got to be a clear process in place. Either that was a task that was assigned that should never have been if it's not important, or that's a person that's not part of the team and we need to figure out how to make them part of the team.
Okay. Well, I think we've covered most of the major issues that business owners and executives face in building sales and marketing teams. Was there anything else you thought needed to be added or discussed?
I think growth mindset, coming back to that's the biggest thing. And this whole idea of a continuum, that you can't split a few marketing people and a big sales force. I mean, it's not working because that doesn't match the way buyers want to buy. So people that are excited, that want to grow, that think there's new options, that think there's opportunities, that want to be part of it, want to move the company forward, and are willing to embrace this blended model. I'd say the bottom line is that's what you need to find. And then you adapt it in terms of insourcing, outsourcing to your preferences and to fill certain technical skill sets.
So for for owners and executives that are looking to get started with this, would you be a person that they could talk to get some help trying to, understand how to get started and put a plan together?
So there's a fastball out in the middle. For many of them, I would be. Obviously, in certain cases, not a good fit. I work primarily B2B and a lot industrial manufacturing. That's just the language that I'm conversing in. But certainly, I mean, you and I are both experienced in the business and would be happy to take a call from somebody and just, spend 15 minutes talking about what they're trying to do. And if there's no way that we could help, then refer them to other resources that, we know would be appropriate based on our extensive connections.
Yep, that sounds good to me too. All right. Well, I enjoyed our conversation today, and we'll see you all next time.
Sounds good. Thanks very much, John. Thanks everyone for joining us, and hopefully there's some common sense in there.
Always. Take care.